However, we will look at a couple other different types of sampling, and they're all on the next page. Other types of sampling that we will get into. We've already talked about one, just having a regular random sample. We'll still use that as a possibility. We'll also talk about the second option, which is what's called systematic sampling. Well, a systematic sampling, I always think of it as kind of the old example of, I think of the root word system. And if you think about the old conveyor belt and the quality control people that used to like test every 10th item that came down the conveyor belt, that's kind of what you want to think of when you think of systematic sampling, is that every 5th or every 6th or every 10th house or item down your conveyor belt is what's going to get tested or sampled. So this is what are happening at what are called regular intervals. That's systematic. A convenient sample is exactly what it sounds like. So our third one, a convenient sample, is exactly what it sounds like. It is whatever is convenient to the person running the test. So convenient sample. So if I wanted it to make a really easy sampling on myself, I'd study all Polk State College students, but out of convenience to me, I would only address my students just because it's convenient to me. The problem with that is that it is usually completely biased. Lazy. Instead of tracking down a random sample of all your students, you're just using what's easiest to you. Okay, the last two I'm kind of going to group together here as stratified and cluster because these get confused a lot. So for stratified and cluster. So I'm going to cover these at kind of the same time. The reason being is they're often confused. So I like to do this kind of covering this by drawing pictures here. I'll kind of do this in the middle of the page. So the idea here is with stratified, your population is broken up into groups and you randomly select some people from each of your groups. That's the idea with stratified. But you're randomly selecting people from all of your groups, from each of your groups. Whereas with cluster, you have your population broken up into groups, but you only take a couple of the groups. So let's say we've got 4 groups and we only select, let's say 3 out of the 4 groups. But then the idea with cluster is you test everything in those groups. So you take some of the groups and you do everybody in those groups. That's the idea with cluster. So again, stratified is you have a bunch of groups. You take some from each of the groups. Cluster, you have a bunch of groups. You select some of the groups and then you take everyone in those groups. So here's a good example. We've got a couple of problems and we are trying to figure out if they're random, systematic, convenient, stratified, or cluster. So let's take a look. An observer watches as an electric company decides to test every 3rd house along the street to make sure its meters are working properly. So on this one, they're testing every 3rd house. That means they're testing at regular intervals. Well, that was our systematic sampling that did things like that, that tested at regular intervals, systematic. Next one. A high school teacher wants to determine the attitudes of students in their school and decides to survey the best students in their class. Well, they are being very picky because they're only doing their best students. So that's not even random. That is just convenient to them. They'll probably get the results and answers they want to. So we're going to call this a convenient sample. Take a look at the next one. In a study of 60 bars, so right off the bat, we're looking at 60 groups. So that means we're going to be looking at either stratified or cluster are the two that break things up into groups. So we're looking at stratified or cluster. Question is, which one? So in a study of 60 bars in the city are selected, and every employee in each of the 60 bars is interviewed. So the idea is they took 60 bars, which is not all the bars, but some of the bars, but they did everybody in those groups. Well, the only one in which we took everybody in the groups was the cluster. So we do not have stratified, we have a cluster sampling, and the key is this each, that you're tracking down every person in those groups. Let's take a look at the next one. In a health study, 50 men and 50 women. Okay, I'm going to stop there. We've got two groups. So we're again talking about stratified or cluster because we have two groups, male and female. Now, remember, cluster has you take everybody in your groups. That's not what they're saying here. They're saying take 50 men and 50 women. So they're saying take some from each group. Well, that's kind of what we did in stratified. So we're going to say that's stratified, not cluster this time. Last one, in a study done at a local high school, 300 students were randomly selected to be observed regarding their eating habits at lunch. Here they're not doing anything special, but they do say that they're going to be randomly selected, but nothing else. So this is just a simple, there's just a random sampling. And that's it.